So close to afternoon though, right? And wherever you may be, it might be afternoon. So welcome to our presentation slash webinar on how to publish for mass consumption, how to grow your brand and business. My name is Kim Barker, and I'm a director at the Institute for Culture and Adaptive Leadership. I teach at Eastern Michigan University and Cleary University, and sometimes Benedictine University. I am also the VP of ISODC, and this webinar is sponsored by ISODC. So you may ask, what is ISODC? ISODC is a leading international collaborative movement promoting and affecting positive growth and change at the individual, team, organizational, and societal level. What we do a lot. We have professional development activities. We have webinars such as this one. We have roundtables, we have training, we have publications, both of the Organization Development Journal and newsletters. Oh, you know what? Quang, can we go to the next slide, please?
Yeah.
Or 2 slides, actually. Thank you. We provide consulting and advisory services. We encourage and support research. I credit this group and a few members of this group with helping me finish my dissertation on time. We have conferences, and we are at a conference right now, our annual information exchange, and we also have virtual conferences. We have certifications, and who do we do all this for? We do this for businesses, nonprofits, NGOs, those in higher education, governments, consultants, and people of all colors, shapes, and sizes. For more information, check us out on isodc.org. Okay? If you could go to the next slide, please, Quang. So in this presentation today, we are going to look at what is a mass consumption strategy? What are your goals in relation to a mass consumption strategy? Who is your audience? Why a strong brand is important? What is your story? What are the 12 C's of branding? And after you've determined all that, where do we go from here? Okay, and we will have a reflection on the end. What do you want to do now with this after you've heard this information? So I am now going to welcome Dr. Jeanne Maes, and here's Jeanne.
Good morning. I'm Jeanne Maes. I'm professor of management and our university ombudsperson for the University of South Alabama. Let's talk a little bit about mass consumption strategy right now. You know, when we talk about publishing, we're talking about having something to say. And in thinking about having something to say, and we're talking about mass audiences here, we definitely need a strategy. You may recognize some of these pieces as the pieces for a strategic communication strategy. They're very similar and they're used the same way. Interestingly, when we think about mass, we're determining many, many different audiences. So I'm assuming that in our audience today, we have academics, we have practitioners, we have students, and there may be others involved. One of the things we want to make sure is we need to make sure that which audience it is that we are targeting. So because of the mass audience, we need to send the same message, the same meaning for different audiences, and using all the different senses, the different methods available to us to reach the different senses. For example, when we think about communication strategy and we think about the ways that we publish today, you think about all the stimuli that are competing to get into our heads. All these things have to get past our reticular activating system, so it has to be something that's very personal and very needful to us to be able to make it into the filter of the mind. So we use different media to reach those different audiences. Some of the types of media is going to depend on the type of audience that you're trying to reach. Some of the media will be print, some will be broadcast, some online. Obviously, some of these are hybrids, social media and specialty media again. And some of these may be mixed media depending on the type of audience that you're looking to reach. You know, the interesting thing, the research shows today that attention span has been reduced from 30 seconds in the 1980s to 15 seconds and going down as of 2017. So keeping that in mind, I think that's very important as we think about a mass communication strategy. Next slide, please. Okay, now, obviously we put the cart ahead of the horse on purpose on this one. So let's go back right here. Yeah, time to determine your goal. You know, when we think about a strategy, the first thing obviously is going to be to determine what it is that you have to say. As the slide says here, what would you do if you knew you could not fail? We recommend a laser rather than a shotgun to reach a target. And it's got to be a target audience. We're recommending maybe one audience at a particular time. I like to think of your communication when you're thinking about mass strategy as a negotiation with your audience. And what do I mean by that? Every communication is a negotiation in that it is focused on achieving a specific outcome. So first of all, you have to know what that outcome is. So we recommend that you start with key phrases to reach that specific audience. Why do we recommend this? Because when you're doing a Google search, for example, if you're looking to solve problems, if you're looking for specific material, if you're writing something yourself, what do? You enter the keywords that most closely relate to what you're looking for. So when you're thinking about reaching an audience, think about what it is that you want to say, keeping in mind all the time who that audience is. We'll go to that audience in just a second. But right now, if you would think about some keywords and come up with 5 minutes just to come up with 5 to 10 keywords that best describes what you'd like to do at this time.
We'd like you guys to do that.
So we have a live audience with us as well. So let's give you about 5 minutes to do that right now. Make them short.
Based on your research.
Based on your research, or based on what it is that you do that you would like to share. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. But this is just to get us started, to be thinking about what it is that you have that you would like to put out there, that you'd like to share. What words or phrases, and make the phrases very short, that would come up in a Google search.
Jeanne, would you like me to share my words?
Yes, Kim would like to share her words. You want to come over to here?
So, that's okay, I can do it too. So my words are empowerment, inclusion, reconciliation, culture, organization development, change, and last but almost most important, fun. About 3 more minutes, so let us know if you're done. And okay.
Okay. In our viewing audience, do you folks need any more time?
Quang, I think there are some messages in the chat box. Could you share some of those?
I don't have any chats directly about this.
Oh, okay.
So if they're sharing with you, that could be different.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, are we ready to move on?
Sure. Would we like people to share some of their words?
Would some of you like, in our live audience, would some of you like to share your words?
Sure, I'll share mine.
Awesome.
Great.
This is Ron Newton.
And I've got 5 simple words, really. Acceptance, meaning take it all in. Inclusive, allow all. Diverse, recognize differences. Mindful, don't be distracted from other things. And then be responsible for everything out there and then decide from there.
Okay, so Ron has said acceptance, inclusiveness, diverse,
What are your last?
Mindful,
mindful,
responsible.
responsible. Okay. We have some from our viewing audience: change, resiliency, coping with change, happy, engaged, culture, fun, emotional stability. That's great. And we're already seeing some commonalities. You know, interestingly, a little bit later, we're going to talk about linking and being able to help each other. So just keep that thought in mind as we move forward. Anybody else like to share keywords? Is that a Joe? Great, Joe.
So I put project management,
Project management,
purpose versus mission or vision,
purpose versus vision or mission,
stakeholder engagement,
stakeholder engagement,
and in the safety realm, culture of safety.
and in the safety realm, culture of safety. Excellent.
Dr. Maes, I've got some webinar participants who have shared some words. If I can get a few minutes, I'd like to share what they're saying.
Excellent. Excellent.
Richard Mayer on the webinar shared change, resiliency, coping with change, happy, engaged, culture, fun, emotional stability.
Great.
Victor shared integrity, courage, communication, change, and culture.
Great.
And Nick shared excellence, engagement, positive development, managerial competencies.
Great. So we can already see some themes developing. Anyone else interested in sharing? Ida?
I have global,
Global,
OD,
OD,
transform,
transform,
innovative,
innovative,
and authenticity.
authenticity. Great. Great.
Oh, Dr. Glover in the back. He would
Dr.
like to
Glover
share.
has one.
Culture, change, and leadership.
Oh,
Culture, change, and leadership. Absolutely. Okay, so are you beginning to see how these key words are going to guide thinking and guide research? And there's lots of leeway within these key words. Okay, anybody else need any more time, or shall we move on to the next slide? Okay, let's move on, Quang, please. Okay, now we've talked about the goal. That's the first thing. So if we're talking about targeting, Stephen Covey said begin with the end in view. So we see what the target is. All right, now who is the audience? And notice that the audience is going to be those who are affected by the brand, which is a coherent set of ideas in your audience's or your consumer's mind. And we're using that audience or consumer in a very, very broad sense. Our audience, of course, is anyone who hears us, and that hearing could be seen on the printed page. It could be, again, our colleagues as academics. It could be our clients, for those of us who are consultants and practitioners. It could be patients for those of us who might be writing in the medical community. For those who are students, it might be peers, it might be professors, who knows? It could be all sorts of folks, or the general public at large. All right, but it's very important to start picturing who that audience is. Again, our suggestion is to start with one audience group to maintain our own focus. Once we get that group targeted, then we can move on. All right, next slide, please. All right, branding. Now we're beginning to move into this area. You know, if you notice over on the left of the slide, you'll see a brand. I found that it reminded me so much of the Old West. If you watch the old Westerns and you think about the cattle that were out on the range, at one time those cattle had no fences, and many, many different owners had their herds together. And the only way to distinguish whose cattle belonged to which rancher was through the brand. Now, it's interesting that once the cattle or that steer was branded, that brand was relatively permanent. While it could be changed, as we've seen by some of the old movies with the rustlers, it's very difficult to change that brand. Recently, I attended a digital branding workshop at my own university, and I want to credit Mary Ann Lowe's with this work. But it's interesting because what does a brand do, and why should you be thinking at the outset about a brand? Because that brand strengthens and extends your own reputation. It reinforces it. It increases awareness of you and what you're putting out there. It shares a story that matters, that makes a difference. And it really acts as a steering device to keep you on course. Okay, next slide, please. Interestingly, remember we're talking about mass consumption again. And as you notice, this picture reminds us so much of what in another picture would be the Old West with all the cattle on the range. All the mixed brands, it's hard to tell them apart. Okay, as is. Next slide, please. So, going back to our analogy, that brand helps you stand out from the others. That's how the cowboys were able to round up whose steers belonged to whom, was by the brand. All righty, next slide, please. Okay. The brand will also reflect your goals. And that's why as you start, it's important to think about that brand. You know, it's really interesting because the way that our brain works is through association. And as we create the brand and the recognition that that brings, our brain will automatically make those links inside so that eventually when our names come up or our area of research, then there's an immediate linkage in our audience's mind with us and our work. Okay? Dr. Barker.
So branding is very important, and it's more than a set of words. Your brand needs to be made real. It should have a story behind it. And who is better than that in doing that than Richard Branson? Richard Branson has said on branding, the idea that business is strictly a numbers affair has always stuck with me as preposterous. For one thing, I've never been particularly good at numbers, but I think I've done a reasonable job with feelings. And I'm convinced that it is the feelings and feeling alone that accounts for my success of the Virgin brand and all of its myriad of forms. Richard Branson is a master at branding. The Virgin brand is world-renowned, right? And it's incredible. Next slide, please. Your story is so much more than an ad campaign, website, or tagline could ever be. The brand story is the core truth of who you are. It's agreed to by all inside and used to open conversations to those outside who need your services. How many of you know products, businesses, consultants who have a very compelling story that assists in their branding. Do you all know people like that? Next slide, please. So you control what you say, but you only influence what others say, right? You can't control what others say about your brand. Next slide, please. But the goal is always for it to touch the heart as well as the head. Yes, yes.
Okay. Yeah, let's go back one, please. Quang, thank you. You know, it's really interesting when you think about stories. What comes to mind and what Kim and I talked about as we developed this material for you was the BARD, and that, if you can't understand my accent, that's Beta Alpha Rho Delta. BARD was the storyteller, the tribal storyteller in ancient villages. He or she kept the history of the tribe, and that oral history was so important. And when you think about brands and the history of brands, those that have remained until today, they do more than just dispense information or give details about something. They appeal to both sides of the brain, both the logical and the emotional side. And just as a quick review, I thought something that might be interesting is just to take a real quick review of some of Vance Packard's original research on the hidden persuaders and how effective this is, because your really strong brands, those who create those brands know quite well what they're doing. That emotional side is so important, and it's so subtle, because we think of brands so much today as the very sophisticated society that we have. But everyone has one or two emotional things that affects. For example, those hidden persuaders were based on 8 specific needs. And here they are. The need for emotional security. Let's go back one, please. Let's go back. Thank you. The need for emotional security. The need for ego gratification. The need for a sense of worth. The need for a sense of power. The need for love objects. For creative outlets. For roots. And for immortality. And you know, interestingly, when we think about advertising, which was the precursor of the modern branding movement, advertising at one time was not stratified the way that it is today. So the theory was, the more of these elements that you could embed in a message, the more likely you were to hit the target you were trying to reach. Well, now with stratification, advertisers are certainly able to reach those markets in a very sophisticated way. Nonetheless, even with stratified markets, those hidden persuaders still work, and they're still very viable today, even as they were so long ago when they were first discovered. Okay. Yeah.
How about some examples of brands that you feel have connected the heart as well as the head? Does anybody have them to share?
Tide.
What is it? Tide? Oh, yes.
Tide, yes.
Definitely.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Somebody in the audience said, make America great again. It is a good branding.
Yeah, it is. Joe?
So, Principles of Success by Jack Canfield.
Oh,
Okay.
definitely.
Principles of Success by Jack Canfield, Joe says.
He is amazing with branding.
Absolutely.
Oh,
Kleenex.
Kleenex.
Yeah, absolutely. That can be very emotional. That's true.
right.
And Q-tips, yes. Yeah, Lena? Coca-Cola. Apple Computer.
Yeah, someone in the chat said Apple. Yeah.
Yeah, somebody in the chat, great.
Apple is,
I see military.
yeah.
Yep, absolutely. Subaru, oh, that's a great one.
Mhm.
Xerox, yes.
Mhm.
Yes.
Harley Davidson.
Harley
Oh.
Davidson, yes.
Yes.
Yes. And you think about those hidden persuaders, and it's amazing how things start to pop up. Yeah.
I mean, Harley Davidson, they have huge events every summer where people come from everywhere to ride their bikes and celebrate together.
Yeah. Great.
Awesome, thank you. Next slide, please. So we're now going to look at the 12 C's of branding briefly. And the first one is courage. And I love the fact that courage does not always roar. Sometimes it's the quiet voice at the end of the day saying, I'm going to try again tomorrow. I have always said a steady pace wins the race. And that's a sign of courage, right? Hanging in there. Confidence. Confidence. I love this picture of these two young men, right? Confidence is like a muscle. The more you use it, the stronger it gets. Next slide, please. Clarity. Clarity is the quality of being easy to see or hear, right? It's the sharpness, it's the crispness of the image or sound. Like the diamond, right? I'm sure Meghan Markle's diamond is very clear, right? And then there's connection. You want your brand to be a connecting point for people. And I love this lady in the picture because she feels connected to her country, right? I'm sure this woman will be around the royal wedding this weekend, showing her her patriotism. Next slide, please. Consistency. It's very important that your brand show conformity in the application or the creativity of what you're producing. And then there's copy. So copy means duplicating, right? Or being able to replicate something. But sometimes you can be a version of something without it being exact. In this age of disruption, right? They say there's nothing new under the sun, but I believe that there's a lot coming down the line that is new under the sun. However, sometimes it's just a tiny tweak that can make a big change. When I think of this, I think of an example. I'm a huge fan of Reese Witherspoon, and around Valentine's Day, she came out with a red lipstick, and it was a fundraiser for, I believe it was breast cancer. And so, you know, how many red lipsticks are there out there, right? But she had this idea as a fundraiser, and it made a connection with a lot of women. So that's an example of, you know, she could say, oh, there's too many red lipsticks out there, I don't need to do another one. But, you know, she was committed, and she used that to brand herself. Next slide, please. So, you know, hopefully the goal is that your brand is a little classy, right? You want to be stylish, you want to be chic, you want to be somewhat elegant, unless, you know, you're going for the opposite. You want to be grungy or something like that. But having a classy brand, I think, is always a good thing, and something that people are drawn to. And then what is the contribution of your brand? Contribution is the act of giving or doing something. So what is its added value, right? What are you providing or proposing as the added value of your brand? And that could be to individuals, to organizations, to groups, societies, etc. Next slide, please. And what is your communication plan? Is there such a thing as too much communication? What do you guys think? Is there such a thing as too much communication? Very rarely, only very rarely have I seen people who communicate too much. It's usually the other, right? So you must create a plan and work your plan. Winston Churchill has said, he or she who fails to plan is planning to fail, right? It's very important. And keep educating yourself. Einstein said, intellectual growth should commence at birth and cease only at death. Julia Childs has said, you'll never know everything about anything, especially something you love. And lastly, this should be all of our goals. George Whitman has said, all of the world is my school and all of humanity is my teacher. And I believe there's so much to learn. Every day, I'm like, oh, this is why I'm here. I learned something new today, right? So the next one, please. So collaboration is so important. It divides the task, it multiplies the success. All right, while you have to be careful with who you pair up with, as Helen Keller has said, alone we can do so little. Together we can do so much. So it's very important that you don't go about this alone, that you partner with the appropriate people. And commitment, never, ever, ever give up. And I love this story because of this. The man gave up and he was just about ready to break through. And I think that that is so important. I'm a huge fan. I DVR Sunday mornings with Willie Geist on NBC. And the other weekend he had Jim from The Office. Do we all know who Jim from The Office is? And he decided that he wanted to do this acting thing with his mother. And, you know, they agreed upon a time that they would, you know, he would pursue this. And when that time was up, he was going to go home and, you know, kind of forget about that. And the time came and it was done. And his mom said, you know what? 3 more weeks. Let's just give it 3 more weeks. I'll buy you a ticket and you can come home in 3 weeks. And guess what? Within those 3 weeks, he got the gig for The Office. So, you know, when you're committed to something, you never give up. You keep going because sometimes you might just be on the brink of it working out. And here again is Dr. Maes.
Okay, thank you. You know, one other thing that Dr. Barker mentioned on the staying with it was you think about the commitment that's involved. I'm sure those of us who have published, especially in academic journals, I know I've had enough rejection letters to probably paper my office at school, as all of us do. And that's just part of it. So just knowing that that's part of the publishing gig sort of helps going into it. Okay, next slide, please. So I think the whole key when we talk about publishing for mass consumption is simplicity. You know, the brain does not do well with clutter. And if we talk about laser versus shotgun approach, that means we've really got to focus. And focus is not a clutter thing. We want to avoid sensory overload, not just for ourselves, but for our audience as well. So keeping that in mind, I think that's a good way to frame this as we move forward. Next slide, please. Quang. So where do we go from here? Let's take a look just a minute at the different audiences that you may be trying to reach. We have a pedagogical trilemma, we call it, which is for many of us research scholarly versus practice academic versus pure practice. And if you go to the next slide, just 1 second, we're going to come back to this one. For those of us that are in AACSB accredited schools, this is our latest matrix of what we deal with. And you notice here, we have the scholarly track, and then we have applied and practice tracks. And it's really interesting because what we sort of have to do, depending on what our school is define what are our interests in publishing and what are our school's needs. And if we can find a mixing or a meeting of the minds on this, then we're in a really good place to be able to move forward, and especially being able to collaborate with colleagues and others. I think this is something important to think about. Since there are not that many AACSB schools, nonetheless, most of our schools are accredited. Mm-hmm. So that's something really to keep in mind. Let's go back one, please, Quang. Thank you. So whether an academic or a practitioner or even a student who's getting started in this, or maybe someone who's already had a career who'd like to say, you know, I have lots to share and I'd like to know where to get started. What I'd like you to do right now is take a couple of minutes and name one goal in each of these areas that you believe applies to you. So I'm going to be quiet and let you do that right now. Where do you fall? Are you in academia and you're publishing scholarly research? Are you a practice academic and you actually do it and then you teach it and write about it in your university? Or are you a student? Or you are a practitioner in the field? Where can you best contribute? We have some wonderful comments from our online folks. Student, student practitioner, clear communication, great, great. Okay, practitioner, terrific.
And sometimes, you know, your message can be in each of the
Exactly.
different areas.
Exactly, right? Exactly. And when we get to our next slide on publishing options, we're going to show you how that can work. Because there's an amazing way that you can parlay so much of this. A scholar practitioner, good. Practitioner first, then practitioner, academic second. Got it. Got it. Scholar practitioner, okay? How about in our room? What's our interest here in the room?
Practitioner.
Practitioner.
Okay.
Practitioner, mostly practitioners. Academic? Academic? Okay.
Joe? Joe, what is yours?
I said, challenge traditional thought, be a heretic.
Be a
Yes.
heretic we have here in the audience.
Joe, do you know Jerry?
For those of you online, we're having some aside conversations here. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, one more. One more, please. Thank you. Now, here we go. Publishing options. All right, let's start with our scholars. We have some of them in both our online and our in-person audience. One of the challenges, which I've read about just recently, and you all probably have seen as well, is academic research is being challenged in the public arena. Who reads our stuff, basically? So one way to bridge this is not only do we have to write for each other as of right now, that may change in the future, but we take those articles and that research that we have written and translate it for some market that we would like to help. Now, what does that mean? When you write, I feel like I'm preaching to the choir here, but we know that when we write for academic journals, and it's also the same for practitioner journals, the smart thing to do is to at least have read something in those journals as to what they're looking for. Read the author guidelines. What are they requiring? So we write for not just the journal, but for that journal's audience. We don't write for ourselves. So in translating, what that means is our style is going to change from an academic perspective of writing to it might be a client perspective, it might be something else that we're going to see on our list in just a minute. All right, we've listed the Organization Development Journal first, obviously, because ISODC is the sponsor of the Organization Development Journal. We are a practitioner-based journal. We take scholarly research and with the purpose of being able to translate that into something that practitioners and business people can actually use. We accept student articles, and I see we have some students in our online audience, so we would certainly encourage you to write, to take a look at the guidelines for the Organization Development Journal and let us help you to get published in these. There is a wide circulation of that journal.
Jeannie?
Yes.
Can I share something?
Yes, please.
So I once heard that the average scholarly publication has 7 reads. So I know when my first one, I'm sure it was my mom, my grandma, my aunt, right? But the ODJ really tries to take that scholarly focus and broaden it.
Yes,
Right.
absolutely. And that's one of the areas that we talk about, taking the scholarly literature and really putting it out there and have people to use it. There are certainly scholarly academic journals. These things appear, if you're not familiar with them, in lists such as the Australian Dean's List, the ABA, Cabell's. There are many schools are making their own depending on what it is, and many are dependent on what the accrediting agencies suggest, or using aspirant schools to help define those lists. There are also practitioner academic journals, and those are journals for the field in the area of practice where you are. And those of you who are in practice probably already know what those journals might be. You can certainly explore those. The OD Practitioner is another excellent outlet for practitioner-oriented articles. Now, let's get into some other interesting things. Books, newsletters, blogs, all of these are areas to move beyond what we normally do. One way to establish your brand, if you haven't already done so, is to begin to publish somewhere. Some of the suggestions might be in your local Chamber of Commerce publications. Another one might be for a blog online, maybe some area where you're particularly interested that you might be a regular contributor. Doesn't have to be every month, but on a regular or semi-regular basis. Another really interesting thought is in Kindle books, e-books, Nook books, however you want to call them. Now, there's an author that I would suggest that you check out online. His name is Steve Scott. This man has made an amazing business of Kindle books. They're very inexpensively priced, from 99 cents up to $2.99, maybe $3.99. Steve found his niche in the entrepreneurship arena, things that small business owners or startups need and want to know. So he'd take one idea and publish at a time. And now if you Google him or you look on Amazon for Steve Scott, you will be amazed at how many books he's produced. He even has a book on how to write a nonfiction book in 21 days, which is actually quite a good publication. So it certainly gives you some ideas.
Jeanne,
Yes.
can
yeah.
I mention
Yes, please.
the ISODC newsletter?
Absolutely.
So if someone is interested in publishing anything OD related, you can contact me, and I will give you my email address at the end of this. And, we can take a look at putting that in our newsletter. And sometimes it's a thought or an idea that you want to research further. And one thing about our community is we're very good at giving feedback, right?
Absolutely. Feedback and helping each other.
Yes.
Now, here's something else to think about for those of you who may be practitioners looking for outlets, and maybe you've never done this before. Why don't you team up with somebody at maybe through ISODC, or someone at one of your local universities or community colleges who has to publish? The old adage, publish or perish, is quite true. And we can work with you to help you to get published and get out there. And once you have one, it's a lot easier to get that second one. Collaboration is the key these days. Students, it's the same thing. Get started right now. Take those assignments that you're doing in class, parlay them into something useful that's actually going to mean something and help somebody, and move forward. It doesn't have to be long and extensive, just one thought that's going to add value. And that's a great way to get started. Okay, any other thoughts from our in-person audience or online? Any other thoughts on this?
Just an example, Ron Newton here, when I was attending CTU, one of the professors was affiliated with a university in England, or in India, called BibTech University.
BibTech University, one of our in-person folks are saying a professor when he was at CTU was affiliated with them.
Right, and it was an opportunity to publish case studies.
Opportunity to publish case studies.
And what this does, it still does, but what it did for me is, just like you said, it made me write my paper to a different audience other than myself.
Right, and it forced him to write his paper to a different audience rather than just from himself to the professor.
And then it was peer reviewed, and then two reviews, blind reader reviews type of thing, where people gave me feedback on my paper that hit home. It caused me to make my paper read different than I really wanted it to, but at the same time, it served a purpose in getting published. And
Wait just 1 minute, Ron.
I've done that several times, and there's a process that you go through the first time, and then you can expect that every other time you publish something, they expect a peer review or expect some input back from someone regarding your work.
Right. What he's saying is that his article went through a peer review process, which was blind, so he didn't know who these peer reviewers were. These peer reviewers in turn gave him feedback, which caused him to write his paper from a very different perspective than he had thought about originally. But he said it was quite good because he said it certainly improved the paper, and he learned a lot through the process. And that's the beauty of hooking up with someone or collaborating with someone, because it really builds your own confidence level and your skills. Joe, did you want to say something?
I was just going to piggyback on that. So online journals is a way, like say Projects at Work is an online journal. It's
Projects at Work, online journal.
And get someone who's known in the field that maybe wants to write an article, and maybe you're newer or you haven't published before, and a lot of times then you can be a second. So
great. Can you all hear him online? Can I have some nods? Yes, I can hear, or no, I cannot hear. Hello? No. Okay. What Joe just said is, what was the name of the work again? Projects at Work. Projects at Work. Thank you. And Joe suggested to get with someone who's known in the field, and you might be a second author, and that really helps to move your work forward. Thank you so much for that.
And I did that a lot when I was first starting out. I would go to amazing individuals such as Dr. Maes, and I would say, I'm willing to do some of the grunt work, right? And can we work together and partner? And I think a lot of established researchers are really willing or wanting to have that help.
Absolutely.
So, yeah.
Absolutely. That's part of the reason we got into academia, right? Is to be able to share what we know. Okay. Thank you all so much. Okay. I can hear Joe. Thank you for that. All right. Next slide, please. Okay. The whole point in all this, it's important for you to shop around in terms of those markets, in terms of the outlets that you choose to publish. And if you're new at this, I'd start very small, get a win, build up your confidence, link with someone, collaborate with someone, and then move on. Those of us who are academics are absolutely delighted to help folks. It's a great way to build networks and collaboration. It's a great way to help students and practitioners, and it builds bridges and networks in our community and with our professional organizations. Okay, Dr. Barker, I'm going to turn it back over to you.
Could you go to the next slide, please? Okay, so what do you want to do? We've had a lot of information here today, and we'd like you to take just a couple minutes, both online and in the room. And it's probably a little easier in the room to partner with folks, but you can also share online. What are your goals? What were your takeaways today? What is your to-do list that you have established for yourself?
We'll give you one from Dr. Barker and me. We decided that we're going to publish what we've put together in this webinar and put it out. So that way you get many different outlets for information. We'll tweak it some, but that way you get a lot of mileage out of one idea, and then you add value to what you have. For those of you who are practitioners, just as another suggestion, you might have one client. You might have learned something by working with another client that would help someone in a different industry. So you can jump from industry to industry with that one thought and get different articles and get your name out that way.
So feel free to share in the chat for some items that you want to accomplish. One thing that was mentioned in this conference this week, which I thought was so profound, is that a lot of times we don't speak about our lessons learned, right?
Absolutely.
Sometimes we don't speak about our failures.
Yes.
That can be somebody's key learning. What did you do so that they know not to do that? And sometimes when it's a failure, it's not always your mistake. It can be environmental, it can be a lot of different things, but I think there's a lot of learning that can come from failures. Yeah. So Victor has commented, start writing. And I think that that is so true.
Absolutely.
You've got to put one foot in front of the other, right? And Quang used different mediums for writing and publishing. And Catherine, as a student, write about my learning experiences.
Absolutely.
This webinar is a starting point, including a couple marketing classes. How to learn reaching masses as a newbie. Thank you for that.
We appreciate that. Something else for the students, you could even write blogs, or you could write something for your college newspaper on how to work in teams. These are common themes that run across not just the United States, but any academic setting that uses teams. What I learned from a conflict in a team, how to resolve it, how to build my team. And of course, you can see my bent as a management professor. But these are some of the things that you can get started, and it doesn't have to be that long.
And teams, they're a necessary evil in life, right? I've seen grown men almost cry because they had to be in a team, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. Okay.
And women, grown women as well.
And women, absolutely. Okay, are we ready?
Yeah, we have a lot of feedback in the room. Does anybody want to share?
We're almost out of time, so
Yep.
Anybody in the room want to share? Earth to group?
We
Hello?
can't get them to stop talking.
This is a good thing. This is a good thing.
I can.
Thank you
Yeah.
so
write
much.
up my presentation for the Total Quality Management Journal that is a journal of the American Society for Quality. So
Right.
Research practitioner.
Right. That's great.
Awesome.
Right. So you want to say that to the group online?
Yes, so Michelle, you have submitted or published?
Before.
Okay.
But what I presented this morning,
Okay.
I could probably write up for
Oh, that's great.
this practitioner style.
Okay.
That's great.
So Michelle presented this morning at the ISODC Information Exchange, and she's going to put that together and have that be a journal submission to the Total Quality Management TQM Journal.
Right. And so for those of you in the field, if that's your area, be watching for an article from Michelle. So there you go. Yeah. And the same for you all. If you all will let us know, that would be a wonderful thing to put on our website for letting our members know what you're publishing.
And in our newsletter.
And in our
Yeah.
newsletter, we'd be
Yep.
delighted to showcase your publications. Okay, anything else?
Awesome.
We're about ready to wrap up.
Yep, next slide, please. So here are a couple references that we've used today. So feel free to take a look at the digital marketing bootcamp. And I've really gotten a lot of information out of Marie Forleo's B-School, which is an online program as well. Oh yes, Joe, do you have something to share?
Well, Lena was just telling us, I wrote it down. She said, I think if you're going to have a methodology or some process that you want to market coming out of your work, make sure it's copyrighted before you put it out there.
That's an excellent point. Thank you, Lena.
Mhm.
Lena just suggested if you're going to have something coming out of your work, make sure you copyright it. Some journals automatically take the copyright, and you need to know that.
Mhm.
But if it's your own work, absolutely you want to copyright it.
And
Great
how
point.
does one do that?
Lena, you want to talk to it? You go through the Library of Congress and
Yeah.
apply for a copyright,
Yeah.
the copyright form, absolutely.
The short version is you could put a little
Right.
C, right?
And that's especially true for your electronic books. You want to make sure that you do that. You bet. Thank you so much for adding that. Okay, anything else?
Next slide, please.
Next slide, please, Clint. Thank you.
So thank you so much for joining us today. It is our hope that this presentation and/or webinar has enhanced or will enhance your practice in the future. We want to hear from you. So feel free to email me at kimjbarker@gmail.com. If you'd like to add anything to this presentation today, if you'd like to discuss any ideas that you have for future webinars, again, it's kimjbarker, B-A-R-K-E-R @gmail.com. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you very much.
Bye.
They're waving at us online. That's great. Super. Are we off?